28, female. Have an older brother, 30, male. And around 2 weeks ago, he asked me to be the legal guardian of his son. His son is just 6 months old. My brother visited me 2 weeks ago and told me that he and his wife wanted me to be his legal guardian because his job required him to move to another city, and his wife, 29, female, spends most of her time in the hospital for her chemo treatments. My brother can't reject this offer either to stay back here because it pays more than his current job, and he desperately needs money to pay for his wife's treatments, as she was diagnosed with stage 2 liver cancer last month. So he worked out an arrangement with his in-laws where they'll be the ones looking after his wife while he works out of state for 5 days and comes back on the weekends. But they're also kind of aged and won't be able to handle taking care of both his wife and his son. So he wanted me to take over the duties of his son. We have no other family apart from each other, so I'm the only person he could turn to, which is why it was really difficult for me to say no at all. Both our parents passed away when we were in our early 20s, and we've been on our own ever since. My brother works in marketing and I'm a high school teacher, so it's not exactly like we're rich, and I'm too busy and tired to take on any additional responsibilities, like looking after my nephew. I also couldn't just say no to my brother because we're all we have. And it would break my heart if he got mad at me over this. There was also another reason that I was kind of skeptical to agree to this legal guardianship, and that was because of all the rumors and gossip I'd heard about my sister-in-law. We live in a relatively small town and news travels fast. So a couple of years back, I think before my brother even got married, I heard from one of my co-workers that one of her cousins had gotten into a lot of legal trouble over a paternity fraud that she'd pulled off and was now being sued by her husband whom she'd been fooling. And even though people weren't really sure of it, there was one name that kept popping up when they were gossiping about this, and that was my present sister-in-law's name. I'm really not sure how exactly she was involved or to what extent, but I did know that she was involved somehow, and she'd helped them cover it up for a few years after their child was born. Their son was almost 2 years old when that guy's wife, my sister-in-law's best friend, insisted that they get married so she could quit her job and live at home with their son. His mother suspected that something was off because of how hard she was pushing her decision, and that's how the paternity test finally happened. And we also learned that apparently my now sister-in-law had played a huge role in this fraud by putting her best friend in touch with her cousin who worked at the hospital and would periodically take money from her best friend and her unsuspecting husband to make sure this was all kept under wraps. So essentially, she and her best friend were fooling the poor guy for money, and while her best friend got into legal trouble for it, she would away scot-free. Almost 2 years ago, my brother told me that he'd met a woman, and it happened to be the same woman whom I'd heard about in this paternity scam gossip. I told him about it back then and warned him, but he was dead sure that she had nothing to do with it, and he trusted her, not the rumors and gossip he heard about her. I didn't know what to say to him, so I didn't interfere. And so within a year, they got married and had a baby. I didn't see anything then because I didn't want to disturb their perfectly happy marriage. And then last month, she was diagnosed with stage 2 liver cancer, which is why she's been in and out of hospital for some time now. I haven't said anything about what I heard from my friends back then, but when my brother said that they wanted me to be their son's legal guardian, I decided that I didn't want to get caught up in anything right now, and so I told him that I'd only agreed to legal guardian because he didn't like the implications of what I was saying, and said that I was needlessly doubting his wife, even though they'd been together for so many years now. But I stuck by what I said and told him that I wasn't going to be his son's legal guardian if he didn't get the paternity test done. First, because I really didn't want any unnecessary trouble in case there really was something that she was hiding still. So after a lot of arguing, he finally gave in and told me that he'd get it done. Then I didn't hear from him for 2 whole weeks, but all of a sudden, 3 days back, he called me and told me that I no longer needed to sign anything and that he was staying here. I was confused because he just cancelled the move out of the blue, so I asked him what changed, and he told me to mind my own business and then hung up on me. That really threw me off because my brother was a generally nice and polite person, so I had absolutely no idea what changed in these past few days. I couldn't even ask anyone else because the only person who was likely to know what was going on with him was his wife. And I didn't want to speak to her, so I waited for a day for my brother to come around on his own and tell me what was going on. But he didn't. So I did what I had to and called up my sister-in-law instead for some answers. She answered as soon as I called, and when she did, she didn't waste a second before she started screaming at me and accusing me of ruining her marriage. I don't know why she said any of that, but one thing's for sure, something awful has happened, and I'm afraid that it has to do with the paternity test. I'd only been hell-bent on my brother getting the test done because I wanted to buy myself some time to think about what I wanted to do about the guardianship, and also I didn't want to invite trouble just in case he wasn't really the parent. But I'm guessing that there was something that his wife had been hiding, and my insistence on the paternity test might have opened some can of worms, because otherwise I couldn't think of a single reason why my brother would make such a decision. I feel awful because just for my own selfishness, I've potentially ruined my brother's marriage, and it doesn't help that his wife's suffering from cancer as well. AITA for insisting that my brother get a paternity test done before I agreed to be the legal guardian of his baby? Update 1. Thank you for all the kind messages and comments. I'm glad to know that not everyone's judging me for wanting to put myself before anyone else. I spoke to my brother today, and he told me everything that had happened in the past 2 weeks after I asked him to get the paternity test done. He told me that after he met with me, he went straight home and told his wife what I'd asked for. He'd assumed it would be a pretty straightforward conversation since he didn't think his wife would disagree, but she was very against it, and it didn't make sense to him. She said that it was insulting that I wanted him to get a paternity test done because that just meant that I still believed that she was a scammer. And even worse, she'd been scamming her own husband. So she was against the whole idea of the paternity test and wanted him to look for alternatives. But her reaction to the suggestion of getting a paternity test done was so overly emotional that even he began to suspect that something was off about her behavior. And after a few days of wondering what to do, he finally gave in and decided to get the paternity test done without telling his wife about it. He didn't know what to expect, but was secretly hoping that he wouldn't find out anything that he didn't want to. Unfortunately, I think everyone knows by now what he must have found out. My brother and his son weren't a match. He was so shocked by the results the first time that he got the test done a second time, just to make sure that there had been no mistakes. And even the second time around, the result remained the same. He was in shock about what he'd found out, since this meant that his marriage was a lie, but he had no idea how to confront his wife. He'd never paid any heed to the rumors he'd heard about her. Not even when I'd warned him, but now, as it turns out, everyone else had been right. and he'd been the one who was dead wrong about his wife. A few days after he got the results, he decided to finally confront his wife. At first, she tried to deny it, but there was no running away from the truth anymore. When he knew for a fact that he's not the father of the son he'd been raising for so long. After a while, she finally confessed to him that a while ago, when they'd just gotten married, she'd had an affair with one of her friends when he happened to be out of town, and that's how she got pregnant. She never came clean about it either, because she felt like that was going to ruin their marriage for good. And once she got pregnant, she knew that she didn't want to be with anyone else apart from my brother. My sister-in-law also spilled the beans on the first paternity scam she pulled off by revealing that she'd been the one who put her best friend in touch with her cousin who used to work at the hospital back then. And her friend's husband never would have found out either if he hadn't gotten another paternity test done independently from a different hospital. So whatever people had been saying about her was true. I can't believe that in spite of knowing the consequences of cheating and lying, she still went through and put my brother through the same thing. It's unbelievable and disgusting, to say the least. And now I'm really glad that I pressured my brother into getting a paternity test done, or else he might not have been able to find out about any of this. She didn't have a job when she married my brother, and after she got married, she decided that she wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. So it had been my brother who'd been supporting her every step of the way. So it wasn't the fact that she was finally sure of him that made her stay with him and pick her marriage over affairs, but the fact that she literally didn't have anyone else to go to once she got pregnant. My brother thinks that that's the real reason he stayed, and I agree with him. If she could cheat on him 1 year into their marriage, then she didn't really love him. And the only thing that made her stay with my brother was the fact that he was willing to look past her history, trust her implicitly, and provide for her without questioning her. She only cared about herself. And while my brother is still struggling to come to terms with that, I'm not. I'd always known that my sister-in-law wasn't the most trustworthy person, but had kept it all to myself since I didn't want to stir up any unnecessary trouble in my brother's life. And he seemed to be really in love with her. And the fact that they were pregnant within a year of their marriage. I couldn't say anything that could potentially mess up their marriage when they were about to have a child together, and once my nephew was born, there was no way I was going to talk crap about my sister-in-law, because that would inevitably end up with me and my brother never speaking again. So I stayed silent, but the truth was bound to come out someday. I just regret that I wasn't the one to stop this from happening. My brother has filed for divorce and full custody of his son. His wife is devastated and insists that she really does love him now, but there's no taking back what she did. I, for one, am happy that he's made the decision to leave, even if it is after so many years. The only thing I feel a little bad about is that she's a cancer patient, and this is coming at a really bad time for her. But my brother deserves better, and I'll stand by that. Update 2. I just found out from my brother that the friend that she cheated on him with and his son's real father had still been actively involved in their lives up until recently. He'd come over for a few drinks in the evening today and was venting to me when he told me about this spectacular bit of information. This man had been an old friend of his wife's, and he'd had feelings for her since forever. But then my sister-in-law had chosen to marry my brother because she felt that this friend of hers wasn't stable financially, which just meant that he was well off enough for her. She told him about this friend of hers long back when they started dating initially, but he'd never suspected a thing because that's how much he trusted her. When she told him the truth, she claimed that they'd been together only once after their marriage just because they were drunk and emotional, but he didn't know if anything she said was true anymore. My brother said that he'd been an idiot to trust her in the first place and regrets spending so many years of his life fighting against anyone who said a word against her, because eventually it all turned out to be true, and she was nothing more than someone who was after whatever little money he had, and he was the only guy foolish enough to trust her despite her reputation. I felt like crap about myself after he left, because if I just pushed him a little harder and forced him not to marry this woman, then maybe he wouldn't be in this awful situation at all. But here we are. It's disgusting that she even remained in touch with the man she cheated on her husband with. Listening to him talk about how his wife would often invite this guy and his wife over for dinner, and they'd all sit and chat like old friends while he raised this other man's son, was sickening. And I just had to listen to him, but this was his reality. I really can't imagine what my brother must be going through right now, and I just keep thinking about how different things would have been if I'd tried to force him to see her reality before he got married to her. It sucks that he's having to go through all of this just because he chose to love someone who didn't deserve any of it. I don't even know what will become of this relationship with his son now, because this is all bound to take a toll on him mentally. He's been living at home with his son, and his wife has moved in with her parents, but she keeps visiting every day to ask for forgiveness and convince him not to leave her. It must be crazy difficult for him to say no to a literal cancer patient after so many years of togetherness. I know he still loves her despite what she did to him and all the lies she told him throughout their marriage and her pregnancy, and I could hear it in the way he was reminiscing today about the good times he'd had with his wife. I wish I could do something to help my brother, but I can't. My hands are tied. The most I can do for him is to offer to babysit my nephew because he's taking up more work and responsibilities in his workplace so that he earns more than whatever he's making now and can give his son the life he deserves. I don't think he'll get full custody of his son given the circumstances. I bet the court will want to let their kid spend as much time as he can with his mother if something unfortunate happens to her. It's unlikely that she'll be able to fight the cancer longer than she already has, and as far as I know, her condition has been steadily worsening for the past few months. To be honest, at this point, I don't even know what to feel about anyone involved in this situation, including myself. I tried my best to warn my brother back when he was dating my sister-in-law, but he didn't listen, so it's not like I'm in the wrong here either. But I also can't just shake off the guilt. All I can say for sure is that every single adult involved here has failed my nephew and made a complete mess of things, including me. I just hope we're all able to come out of this as better people now. Update 3. It's been a week and a half since my brother last visited, and he's been really caught up with work. He dropped by today and requested me to watch my nephew for a couple of hours as he had to go visit his lawyer urgently. And I agreed because this was the least that I could do for him when he was in such a state. Once he came back, he told me that his wife had told her friend about who was the real father of her son, and he's willing to fight for custody as well if my brother doesn't agree to his wife's terms. He told me that she's still willing to patch things up with him and even tried to play the cancer card by saying that she wouldn't even be around for much longer, probably so he should just let her spend the last few months of her life peacefully, instead of being so selfish and disrupting it all with legal complications. She doesn't even understand that the custody battle isn't a way to get back at her, but is just to ensure that even if she does pass away, her so-called friend isn't able to just swoop in and take his child away from him just because he's his biological father. Only a truly selfish human being would imagine that this is all about them. The only thing that my brother is doing to get back at her, as she says, is the divorce, and that's just because he respects himself too much to spend any more time with someone who has done nothing but use him for these past couple of years. They had a really bad argument about the same a couple of days ago when she dropped by to see her son and talk to him yet again so that she could persuade him to stop the legal proceedings. When he told her that he wasn't going to change his mind, she got mad and said those things, and the situation just got worse. He believes that she got her friend involved just to retaliate, and I agree with her. I don't even know what her friend's wife is going to say about all of this. They've only been married for 4 months according to what my brother told me, and this is some insane crap that they're getting into. I'm grateful that my nephew himself is blissfully unaware of any of this, and even today he seemed as happy as ever. I hope that he stays this way forever because the poor kid really shouldn't have to deal with so much from such a young age. Update 4. Hi everyone, my sister-in-law visited me today to see my brother. He'd been here to drop the baby off for a while and he'd been avoiding her for a few days, so she turned up at my house because she knew he was likely to come here. I tried to tell her to go away, but she looked so sickly and weak that I was having a really hard time turning someone like that away. So my brother took over for me, and instead of turning her away, he invited her into the house and told her to make it quick because he also had to leave for work soon. I was in the room with them and the entire conversation happened right in front of me, which made me feel like I was intruding on something really personal. My sister-in-law was pleading with my brother to let her have joint custody, and she'd somehow managed to get rid of her friend since she didn't even want to involve him in the first place. But her emotions got the better of her and she ended up telling him the truth, which is why he got involved. She said that she'd made her peace with the divorce and wasn't even going to contest it, but she desperately needed to see her baby because her cancer was just getting worse and it had already progressed to stage 3, according to what her doctors told her this week. So she needed to spend as much time as she could with her son. I thought my brother was going to say no, by how distraught he looked, but instead he told her that the most he could do for her at this point was that he could let her have supervised visits. He told her very calmly that she'd lied to him for months and that he couldn't just accept it and move on just because she was sick. He was also suffering, and just because his pain and scars didn't show didn't make it any easier for him. He told her that he'd fought against everyone who called her a gold digger and a scammer, but eventually that's what the truth was, since she cheated on him in spite of how hard he'd been defending her. So now, for his own sake and the sake of his son, he wanted to let her go and start afresh. My sister-in-law didn't seem too happy about what was being said, but my brother was quite firm that she could either agree to supervised visits once a week or she could go to court against him. After some silence, she said that she'd pick supervised visits, which is what the court would have ordered anyway, so now they only need to legally agree to that arrangement. The divorce is still going to happen, though. I don't know what the future has in store for my brother and my nephew, but I pray that it's only good things. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.